welcome to the College Chaps podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk about the stories coming out of SEC Media Days, and we'll touch on that a little bit in a second. But first, we are the Chaps. I'm George, and I'm joined by Ollie. And for the first time, I should say that we're operating in different time zones. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing really, really well. Not as well as you, though, my friend. I had an excuse to get an SEC edition of the College Chaps podcast in back for George. Like, this is the only man who would fly across the pond to Atlanta just for the sole purpose of making sure that we get an SEC specific podcast in before the start of the season. Extremely just hiding my jealousy and envy, to be honest with you.
I tell you, the lengths you have to go to talk about the SEC on this bloody podcast. So if you're not watching this on YouTube, you should probably. Well, Ollie's just told us that I'm recording at SEC Media Days, and I'm actually in the College Football Hall of Fame, which might be for me anyway, might be the coolest setting that I'm going to record a podcast on. So it's a unique episode in that respect. So, Ollie, we're not going to spend an awful lot of time talking about this, but let's jump into some of the key stories that have come out this week. And LSU typically open up SEC Media Days, and they did. Brian Kelly was his usual bullish self. He was very high on LSU. To his credit, he said that he's going to be near before, and the team didn't quite live up to reputation, but he did seem to have a really high opinion of the team that he's got. So our first question is, are LSU contenders or pretenders? What do you think about that?
This is going to sound like almost like a cop-out answer, but I think at this moment in time, it's kind of both. I sat down yesterday to write up the SEC, my latest SEC power rankings for PFSN, and LSU is such a difficult team to read this year. And you're right, Brian Kelly was bullish. This was one of the bits of the SEC Media Days that I managed to follow yesterday while I was working. And Brian Kelly was bullish about this team, and he has a lot of reasons to be so. And I think it boils down to this with LSU: there's a lot of pieces in that locker room that should make them not just an SEC contender, but a contender for obviously the college football playoff and a run into that. And it starts with Garrett Nussmeier, who I think is one of the best returning quarterbacks in college football. So it starts with him. It starts with the things that they did around Nussmeier, in particular the wide receiver room, because LSU wasn't a team. You know, we talk about these LSU teams going back through the times that we've done this podcast. The wide receiver rooms that program has had, the Jamal Chases, the Justin Jeffersons, you know, so many talented players. And last year, that room really didn't live up to the expectation that you would put to an LSU target wide receiver room. And I think Brian Kelly, he talks about the transfer portal, and the wide receiver room is one of the areas that they really did address that this season with Nick Anderson and Barry Brown out of Kentucky, two really exciting, electric playmakers to go in that offense alongside the returning Aaron Anderson. So I think offensively, there's a lot to be excited about. Defensively, some of the top playmakers for me in the country, you know, it feels like every year we talk about what can LSU do with Harold Perkins Jr. How do LSU use Harold Perkins Jr. to maximize his domination, his destruction capability in that defense? But a guy like Whit Weeks, the linebacker, he was there yesterday, I believe, with you guys in Atlanta. He is such an incredibly talented player. You know, led the SEC in solo tackles last year. Just an incredible force at the linebacker position, which is exactly what you want in the SEC, exactly what you need. And then it's funny, I a couple of months ago, I kind of looked at this team and I was like, I don't see a guy or two guys. You know, we're used to LSU teams that are big contenders having these incredible secondaries. You know, you think back to guys like Derek Stingley Jr. And I was like, I don't really see a guy there that is that caliber. I don't see a unit that has been the caliber we've seen out of LSU before. But then when you actually sit down and you look at that room, Look at a guy that they're bringing back like Ashton Stamps, who led the SEC in pass breakups last year. They added a number of guys from that were the top defensive back on their teams last year in the transfer portal. So AJ Holsey, a guy out of Houston, who's incredibly impactful in the back end. A guy like Mansour Delane coming over from Virginia Tech to anchor that secondary as well. So I think there's a lot of pieces in that equation, in that puzzle, that ticks the box for LSU as a contender. But then you flip the script, you're replacing four starters. They bring back just one starter on the offensive line. They bring back four guys. And Brian Kelly talks about this at length, right, George, on Monday, yesterday, like about the guys that they're bringing through from the offensive line room, guys that are homegrown that they're bringing in. They haven't addressed it in the transfer portal, but they do have to replace four starters and four really good starters on the offensive line as well. So that's such a key component to that discussion about LSU as a contender or a pretender. And then there's a schedule. You know, they avoid Texas, which is obviously a boon, but they start on the road at Clemson, a Clemson team that I think is going to be the best team in the country this year. I'm very, very bullish. I'm as bullish on Clemson as Brian Kelly was bullish on LSU yesterday, I think. So you look from their first five games. I looked at it yesterday. I think they could be 2-3 going into October. And that's a really difficult place to come back from if you're a team that is expecting to compete for a championship, a team that is expecting to compete for the playoffs. So a lot of conflicting thoughts in my mind about LSU as we head into the season. I'm just intrigued. I think they're one of the most intriguing teams in college football this fall.
And they've had a lot of hype, right? Because this notion that LSU could be a contender is not just us. There's been a lot of preseason hype, and of course, it's fueled by events like this. Clearly, a lot of the questions yesterday to Kelly weren't about the offense, they were about defense, because defense has been a problem for them, and he admitted as much yesterday when he talked a lot about a lot of the games that they should have won, but they didn't win. And we'll go on and talk about the new Netflix series, but actually episode 1, spoiler alert, features LSU heavily, and it's the first couple of games of the season where they actually don't perform as well. They have a lead and then they lose the lead. So I agree with you in that respect. It's that point in the season where I think everybody's got their rose-tinted spectacles on, or their maroon-tinted spectacles, or whatever, purple, whatever colour for LSU, where I think you look at it, but the nitty gritty will be when that first game kicks off, and it's a bit of a tough game. So yeah, I think they fall into that camp where they could be either or, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, you don't want to be going into that opening game. Well, they are going into that opening game with we talked about the offensive line. Clemson this year has a unit for me on the defensive front that is as good as any that we've seen in the past decade at Clemson. And that's, we've seen the talent that program's produced. And you think back to the line, there was Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence. Like, that is Clemson again this year with the likes of TJ Parker and Peter Woods, Demonte Capehart, who came back. That was not very easy to say on a Tuesday evening. Like, those guys, that four across the defensive front, you're going into a season opener with a brand new offensive line. You need those guys to gel, to click quickly. And I get what Brian Kelly's saying. They've all come up together. This is a room that has essentially been the second unit in practice, probably week in, week out last year. Scout team offensive line last year, just with returning the center. But yeah, that Clemson defensive front, and then Ole Miss, like the 5th game of the year, Ole Miss loaded up in the portal. They've got some great defensive talent as well. So if that O line doesn't hit the ground running in week 1, like, that is a problem, and that is a problem early, and it's a problem often.
And we probably talked about this longer than we intended to, but there's a couple of things. One, just going to touch on what you said. We've talked a lot about the defense, and then obviously about the offensive line. Much of this will depend on how effective Garrett Nussmeier is, right? There's a lot of hype about Nussmeier based on what he did last year, but also because the fact that he's a returning, quarterback with 3 years worth of experience in the SEC, right? If he performs, right? I think there's still a question mark. I'm not as high on Nussmeier as many other people. And then the other thing, just really quickly, I hadn't realised until yesterday how poor LSU's record is in the first game of the season. They are truly shocking in the first game of the season. So back to your point, and not to name drop, but when we spoke with Dabble, he played Georgia in that first game. Yeah, Georgia won, but it was a pretty close game. Clemson are going to give them a good game. And you're right, many people have Clemson as not just college football playoff participants, but getting quite far in the college football playoff this season. Right, let's go on to the quarterbacks, because last year's SEC Media Day wasn't really dominated by the quarterbacks, this Media Days is dominated by the quarterbacks. And I just wanted to get your view on a couple of the guys that we chatted to yesterday, and then the big name that we all chatted to today. But let's start with Austin Simmons, right? I saw a hugely popular, sort of hugely confident young guy who has graduated at the age of 19, is now doing an honours degree. I think it blows everybody's mind. He was very calm, very collected, very confident, but not being cocky. There's a lot of hope. I spoke to some of the Ole Miss beat writers. There's a lot of expectation now in Oxford about this guy replacing Jackson Dart. But the fundamentals, Ollie, I don't know how much you know about Simmons. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I think it starts with what you've touched on there. It's the fact that this is a kid who actually this should be his true freshman year. He reclassified from the 2025 high school class. You talked about the actual school accomplishments that this kid has got under his belt already. He should be a true freshman this year. So 2 years reclassified from the 2023 class. He's already been on campus for a couple of years at Ole Miss. He's learned everything that you could need to know from a guy in Jackson Dart who, I was looking at it earlier today. Lane Kiffin, since taking over at Ole Miss, he's had Matt Corral for 2 years. He's had Jackson Dart for 3 years. Like, Austin Simmons has got a great footing to come into. Now, there's a lot of expectations. There's big shoes to fill. What Jackson Dart did last year was incredible. Mm-hmm. But he showed in the game against Georgia. This is the thing with several quarterbacks in this 2025 college football season. There's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of hype. There's not a lot of evidence as you come into the season. And Austin Simmons, thrown into action against Georgia last season, he led that drive, went 5 and 6, 65 yards or 56 yards. Led a drive against the Georgia Bulldogs defense, which, there's a lot of quarterbacks who have played many years in this college football landscape and environment who couldn't do that against the Georgia Bulldogs. So that is very much something to be said about his on-field capability. Those flashes last year when he was brought in relief of Jackson Dart. But it starts, I think, the quarterback position, it's all cerebral. And Austin Simmons has shown both in the classroom and in an event like you're at right now in SEC Media Days to handle a scrummage like he was put through yesterday. I saw some of the questions asked to Austin Simmons. Just handled it with the maturity of a guy who has been playing college football for 3 or 4 seasons, and he's been in the ecosystem, he's been in the landscape, he's been around Lane Kiffin. Like, you couldn't ask for a better person to teach you how to deal with the media than Lane Kiffin. But it feels inbuilt with Austin Simmons, and that's the reason why Ole Miss, Kiffin was on stage with the whatever your SEC network shows, George, better than me. I don't pay any attention to this. Get up, get over, good morning, whatever it's called. I don't know. Like, he was on stage with the crew there, and he could see how excited he is about Austin Simmons. And it starts with the kind of maturity that's exuding already, which that's exciting to see. It's they've invested well in the transfer portal to make sure that he's got a lot of pieces around him as well, and that defense. That how many seasons would we be looking at a guy like Austin Simmons coming into Ole Miss and he'd have to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns a game? He'd have to get 50, 60 points on the board because the defense was so bad. He's not going to have to do that this year for Ole Miss because that defense was so good last year. They spent the time and invested, and everything's in place for that defense to be good again this year. So he doesn't have to make wild decisions. He doesn't have to do. You talk about Garrett Nussmeier. Some of the stuff he needs to clean up this year is the decision making because he's chasing games because that LSU defense wasn't so great last year. Austin Simmons doesn't have to do that in 2025. I think it's a great footing for him to be a first year starter at that football program.
Yeah, I was just so taken. I'd spoken to some of the Ole Miss beat writers beforehand, and they used the word poise, and that's an unusual word to use with a 19-year-old, right? But there was nothing that was thrown at him yesterday that remotely phased him, apart from my accent. He couldn't understand my accent, but hey, he's not alone in that.
George.
He's not alone in that respect, right? Half the people listening to this podcast don't know what 50% of the episode's about. But no, he was. I think everyone came away from that being really very impressed. All those who didn't know about Simmons came away from it being really impressed. And then the other thing you talk about the defense, I've heard a number of times, and I think there is sometimes the potential for quite a bit of hyperbole these things, right? Because it's a preview, it's a build up, it's all of that kind of stuff. But people really gushing about Pete Golding's defense. Now, people did not gush about Pete Golding's defense at Alabama, that's for certain, right? But maybe he's just landed at the right place because Kiffin's giving him the space to operate, and they were much improved last year. Now, second year into that new look, then with the talent they've got at their disposal, I think everyone's, including Kiffin, is just reticent to push that kind of the hype about them because they were so hyped last year and ultimately fell short. Kevin did say that he didn't. He still doesn't worry about not making the college football playoff. He's well and truly over that. But he's certainly looking at it, and they've got a reasonable schedule, if I remember correctly. So let's see how they get on. Quarterback and a team who are not pulling back on the hype are Vanderbilt. And Diego Pavia made a bit of a splash yesterday. I don't know how much you saw of his appearance, but there's a young man that's not short of confidence. And I don't mean that in a cocky, arrogant way, far from it. I think he charmed everybody during the time that he spent with us. But he certainly, and Clark Lee talked about how much of an impact he had not just on the football team, but on the culture of the football team. And it clearly is something very close to his heart. So my question then, Ollie, is Diego Pavia, is he a changing force for Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt still, as much as they had some signature wins last year, didn't turn the tide as much as Clark Lee wanted them to. Can they turn the tide this year? Can they have a winning season?
Yeah, I mean, technically they had a winning season last season because they went 7-6 overall with first bowl win for the program for more than a decade. I thought Clark Lee was interesting yesterday because it would be easy to stand on last year and say, like, we've been the whipping boys of the SEC for years. Like, we weren't last year. Like, let's, just great, just like reflecting the basking the reflective glory. That's it. I'll get my words out properly in a minute. Which I thought was
for you. Need a cup of coffee.
I know, which was, I thought was like Clark Lee yesterday was super impressive on that podium, and it was how he talked about this year that showcases what influence and impact last year, and particularly Diego Pavia has had on this Vanderbilt Commodores football program because they're not happy with what they got last year. That's just a stepping stone to what they think they should be. And people might laugh at that, but I think there's an element of this program was forever changed by the events of last year. And a large part of that is Diego Pavia. And we saw it at New Mexico State when he was there, and they came into Conference USA at the same time as Liberty Flames. And like Liberty, the season that Liberty had with Caden Salter kind of overshadowed what Diego Pavia and New Mexico State did. But they beat Auburn. New Mexico State beat Auburn in that year. And that's Diego Pavia's influence. He's a gritty, determined, enthusiastic, passionate leader of a college football program, and that's who you bring to these events, right? You look at all the people that are there this week in Atlanta, who were there last week for the Big 12 media days in Frisco, who will be there for the ACC and the Big 10 next week, and all the group of five conferences. You take your leaders, you take the people that represent your program the best, and that's exactly what Diego Pavia does. And he's changed that football program on the field. He's changed college football full stop with his ability to challenge the NCAA. His rule is, after all, it's his ruling that is allowing so many former JUCO players to play college football this season. So we talk about the impact that Diego Pavia has had. It's not just on this Vanderbilt football program, which, that is clear, that impact is clear, but it's college football as a whole. And he is every single right within the world to come out and be, he would have every single right in the world to come out and be cocky, but like you say, he doesn't come across as cocky.
He's very proud of that. He's very proud of doing that because he didn't talk about himself. He talked about all the others who will come behind him, and that gave me the impression that he's not a guy that's going to laud about the fact that he did it for himself. It's about the team, right?
100%. And the only thing that looks like he was lording it over was those sparkling earrings he was flashing in your face while you were trying to talk to him.
Well, so just quickly before we move on, the one thing that struck me, and that I'm quite a big fan of Clark Lee. I like the way he goes about things. I think he's the right person for Vanderbilt, and you and I exchanged messages on this. He got a little emotional yesterday, talking about it. It obviously shows what it means to him. But he said something which Pavia then repeated during his huddle, which was, listen, with the way the results fell last year, we were as close to 2-10 as we were 10-2. And a lot of coaches have talked about the fine line of winning in the SEC. So I don't think there's, as much as I said there's hype around Vanderbilt, I don't think it's coming internally from the program. I think they're pretty grounded and they know how difficult it is. And we are talking about Vanderbilt, not to be disingenuous, but we are talking about Vandy. So, but this is where the hype train gets stratospheric, because I'm sitting only 20 feet away from where the latest member of the Manning dynasty finished his media days, and that was quite something to behold. We don't know yet, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Ollie, we don't know yet the impact that Arch Manning's going to have in college football, but certainly most of the world thinks that he's going to have a significant impact, insofar as a lot of people suggesting over the last couple of days that he's already won the Heisman. So what do you think about not Arch Manning himself, but the hype around him?
Yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase you use, George, because Arch Manning's impact on college football is already real. It's already evident, right? And it was evident last year. It was evident when college football playoff starting quarterback for the Texas Longhorns. You think back to Sam Ehlinger shouting, "We're back," after they won the Sugar Bowl. And it's all been building to this point last year where they reached the college football playoff. And the starting quarterback for a Texas Longhorns team is sat in the media availability, and there is no one there because they're all focused on Arch Manning. His impact on college football is already real. It's already visible. Just for him being a Manning, right? This is it. This is the name alone. The same as you see with Shedeur Sanders, when Shedeur Sanders first rocked up at Jackson State with Deion. Like, the name brand alone buys you a lot. And then it's time to produce on the football field, which Shedeur did. Shedeur took care of business at Jackson State. Shedeur took care of business at Colorado. Now Arch Manning's got to do the same at Texas. And I think the thing with the on-field product is so many people last year, and you've got to bear in mind the caliber of opponent this was against, because Arch Manning saw here the most of his playing time against, teams that weren't the greatest in college football last year. That's not a disrespect to the level of football that I have such an affinity for Group of Five football, and Louisiana Monroe last year had an incredible season under Brian Vincent. But with all due respect to the Warhawks, that isn't the Georgia Bulldogs defense that Arch
Mhm.
Manning was facing. It's not the Ole Miss defense that Arch Manning was facing. It's not, South Carolina's defense last year was incredible. It's not those defenses. So I think the hype for the on-field product comes through. Texas did look a little bit better offensively when Arch Manning was on the field. He's got that mobility, that a little bit of athleticism that Peyton never had. Let's be honest, but Quinn Ewers didn't have at Texas either. So when it was needed, when you wanted someone to pick up 10, 15, 20 yards with their legs as a quarterback, Arch Manning gives you that, and he showed that last season. I think that's where the name brand kind of merges with the little bits that we've seen so far and what we know about him coming through the high school ranks. Like that all merges then together to create this hype for Arch Manning era at Texas. Arch Madness is, I don't think you made that up yourself, but I'm going to give
Totally
you the
did.
credit.
I'm
going
going
to
to
give
take
you
the copyright for
yeah,
that.
I'll let you take the credit for you. But that's what it is right now in Texas. For me, Arch Manning will be the quarterback of a team that could win the national championship. And when we talk about New York and we talk about the Heisman, how often do we see that the quarterback of a team
Yes.
that is arguably the best in college football gets that accolades, that trip to New York? And I think that's what we'll see this year. But I don't think the story of Texas Longhorns football in 2025 is Arch Manning. I think it's defense, it's the running back room, bringing back guys like Quintravian Wisner, guys like CJ Baxter who missed last year. There's a lot of moving pieces. We talked about LSU. Texas has those moving pieces on the offensive line as well. But the defense at Texas is so good, even with the pieces that they lost from 2024. That will ultimately be what guides them to a title. If they can get to
Mm-hmm.
a title, it'll be that. But when you lead the offense as a quarterback and your name's Manning, everything's kind of aligned to kind of reality meets the hype train at some point in late November.
Yeah, and I think that's only natural, right? The quarterback gets all the credit and the kudos when they're winning, and he gets all the negativity and the criticism when they're not.
100%.
So I can absolutely see that. One thing I would just a general comment in the passing. When he left here and he was heading out, I'd kind of nipped ahead to take a video of him leaving because everywhere he goes, he's just mobbed, kind of idea. And Emily Grace was standing beside me, right? And as we walked back, I turned around and I said to her, "I don't, I don't mean he's not tall, but he's not as big as I thought he was going to be, right?" And I remember seeing Eli Manning at the airport, and Eli is huge. He is a monster of a man, and Arch is not. So it will be the physicality of the season ahead is going to be interesting. And like every great quarterback, he has to be kept on his feet. So you're right, the offensive line is really important. We're well over the time that we're going to do. I do want to talk quickly about two things. First one was we got preview of a new Netflix series called Any Given Saturday, which is a docu-series made by the same people who Full Swing and Sprint and Drive to Survive. I'm not going to go into it, but the first episode was absolutely awesome. And the executive producer, Paul Martin, was there and had got a chance to have a chat with him afterwards. And what struck me, we know that there is a college football fandom on this side of the pond. We know that fandom is growing. And Drive to Survive is credited with the rise in interest of F1 in this country, in the USA. And I said to him, could it have the opposite effect with college football in the UK? And the short answer was he hopes so. Now, that means that his programme has been hugely successful, but it certainly opens up. And he was at pains to say the programme is not about documenting what happens in the season, because we all know what happened last season. It's about some of the stories and some of the personal messages that are coming out of it. And I thought it's going to be really interesting to see what we think of college football. And I'm sorry, Ollie, it's SEC football. He didn't seem to want to go to the Sun Belt or the Mountain West, but it's going to be interesting to see what people think of that series when it hits the Netflix on the 5th of August.
I think the great thing about there's multiple great things, but for me, there's two things that stand out as being particularly exciting as someone who is a college football fan and who gets the luxury of covering the game of college football on a daily basis. Is there's two things. It is access. How often do we talk about the inability to actually see college football in this country? So for a lot of people, it will be the first opportunity to really see college football on the big screen. Not on an iPad streaming an illegal stream from wherever. Not that happens, obviously. Or the odd game that we get shown on Sky or BT or whatever that has been historically. You can sit down in the comfort of your living room and watch a program about college football. And I remember as I got into the game of football, documentaries on NFL Network were some of the things that really fired me up into it, getting involved in sort of being interested in the sport at a deeper level. And that leads me to the next point of this documentary. I've seen the trailer. I've not seen the full episode like you, George, but I've seen the trailer for it. And from everything that I can understand about what this Netflix show is going to bring us, and based on the other shows that have been produced by the same company, it will highlight everything that we love about college football, because as much as it's the on-field product, it is everything that comes alongside it. It's the pomp and the ceremony and the tradition and the off-field storylines. The greatest part of my job is talking to people who play college football, not necessarily about playing the game. And it's going to bring that into people's living rooms. And I think that's then the thing that really raises the interest level in the game, because you begin to understand what this is all about. Because there isn't, how many times have we said it over the past 6 or 7 years we've been doing this podcast? There isn't an equivalent in this country of college football. So to have something that is in your living room, on Netflix, that showcases everything that we love about the game, I think it's going to be awesome for people over this side of the pond, let alone for American fans who already get it, who already know what it's all about.
I agree. And I'm not going to labour the point because I'm hoping that we might get Paul to come on and talk to us at some point before the show airs. The last topic, rumour, scandal, whatever you want to call it. I think at some point yesterday someone was just looking for something to say, but I don't know if you heard, but Greg McElroy was asked about Nick Saban, and Greg McElroy suggested that he had a really good source that Nick Saban would come back into coaching. And that took on a whole new life yesterday, even to the point that Hugh Freeze was going to be sacked and Nick Saban was going to be appointed the new coach of Auburn. Could you imagine? Not in a million years. But these things are never going to go away. And of course, Saban's not here this year. He was here last year, which was really the start of his career as a television pundit. So maybe that's not helpful in that respect. But a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed it, rightly so, because he seems to have the life of Riley now. He seems to be on every nationally ranked golf course in the US, not at the same time as Hugh Freeze, I would suggest. But that does seem like a stretch, even though Greg McElroy tells us that his source is very reliable.
Yeah, I don't buy it, and I don't want to buy it either. It's so often when you take a year out and you go back, it doesn't work, right? And I think that we're going to see with we could see that with Bill Belichick this year at North Carolina. Which is it's a different situation because obviously he's only exclusively coached in the NFL. He's taken that time away and he's come back to he's come now to the college level. So it's not the same situation. But I think once you make that decision that you're going, you shouldn't go back. And rather selfishly, I think from a college football fan perspective, and for everyone who watches college football, one of the great things about the 2024 college football season was having Nick Saban in the studio for college game day, in providing analysis on games and giving showing how good he was at that. Like the guy's too talented if anything. No one man should be as talented as Nick Saban is. But it's a joy to behold. And I don't want to miss that from my screen this fall. I want to see and hear and be around that opinion and the insight that he brings to the college football table. So yeah, I don't see it. Like I say, I don't want to see it either.
No, I don't disagree. I just don't think it would be. He seems so settled in the new role, and I don't know what would be the driver behind that. Will you allow me to name drop for a second?
Oh yeah, of course, George. Why? What? No point you being there if you're not going to name drop, is there?
Um, I had well during my lunchtime I had a chat with Coach Cutcliffe, right? Um, and we were kind of just generally chatting about life, but we were talking about the changing face of not just college football, but coaches' roles in college football. And I was talking about some of the pressures that the coaches are facing, and I talked about how eloquently Kirby Smart talked this morning about developing his players in a very different and very difficult environment, and he agreed. But he went on to say that it's such a difficult environment for the coaches because the power has shifted effectively, and he said that's essentially, in his view, why Nick Saban had to step away because the power had moved away from the head coach towards the player. Now, I'm sure there's many people listening to this to say it's long overdue, but there has to be a balance. And Coach Cutcliffe was kind of, suggesting that players are trying to hold schools and coaches to ransom, which we are seeing instances of it. And Kirby talked about that a little, and Steve Sarkisian talked about that this afternoon. That if a player's coming looking for more money, then it's maybe not the player that they need to have on the roster. So certainly no question. But I would too would be hugely disappointed if Nick Saban decided he was coming back into the game. I'll wait to finish. so
He react. I thought Coach Saban was just going to appear in the background then as you said. Oh, well, he's actually here. He's going to dispel the rumors live on the College Chats podcast.
I've just seen Sarkisian, but he's too far away for me to ask him to come on the podcast.
Oh, I bet you'd have a fight to get him on anyway. You'd have to fight through all the Texas media.
Well, so I was there was a lull this afternoon, and they put out so right behind me is the backstage area, but it's also where the media canteen is. So I went in there to grab something to eat because my sugar levels were dipping, but I decided not to feed my sugar levels inside a hot dog, and I was standing stuffing a hot dog in my face when right beside me, a door opened and Steve Sarkisian and his wife came out to see me ramming a hot dog in her mouth. So I think he's probably off food for the rest of his life, to be perfectly honest. Anyway,
what an introduction to our show.
On that high note, let's end. That's we've run over massively, so I'm sorry, Ollie, for keeping you up. That's all from us on this episode. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you, Ollie, for putting up with my name dropping over the piece. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.